Impossible, She signed what Arthur Kensington's voice was a strangled whisper, his knuckles white, as he stared at the fallen phone. The champagne flute beside him remained untouched, its celebratory bubbles mocking the sudden dread that had seized him. Across the opulent hotel suite, Olivia Munro lowered her magazine, an impatient frown creasing her brow. "Arthur, what on earth could possibly be more captivating than me right now, darling? You look absolutely ghastly." "There's undoubtedly something far more captivating and much more terrifying awaiting Arthur. Are you curious to discover what earth-shattering secret is about to be revealed, and how this tense game will finally play out? Let us know your predictions in the comments below, and hit subscribe so you don't miss a thing." The crystal chandelier in the grand foyer of the Kensington penthouse tripped 1,000 pinpricks of light across the marble floor, each one a cold, indifferent star in Isabel Beaumont's increasingly desolate universe. Tonight it was meant to be a celebration. 10 years. 10 years tethered to Arthur Kensington, a man orgully whose public persona was as meticulously crafted and as flawlessly polished as the Italian sculptures gracing their opulent living spaces. Arthur, ever the magnate, ever the master of ceremonies, even in his own life, had orchestrated the evening with his usual impersonal precision. Champagne flowed a somber string quartet, played something vaguely celebratory in a far corner, and a curated guest list of New York's elite murmured polite congratulations. Isabel, draped in a sapphire gown that mirrored the cool, distant hue of her husband's eyes, played her part. She smiled, she nodded, she accepted the air kisses and the empty accolades, a perfect portrait of the contented millionaire's wife. But beneath the silk and the carefully applied composure, a fragile unease had begun to splinter. It had started subtly, a series of almost imperceptible shifts in the tectonic plates of their marriage. Arthur, once merely preoccupied with his burgeoning empire, had become distant. Not just busy, but absent in a way that left a chill even when he was in the same room. His business trips, once a predictable rhythm in their lives, had become more frequent, their destinations vaguer, their durations elastic. Tonight, as he raised a glass, his speech a smooth, practiced litany of shared successes and enduring affection, Isabel watched him. She saw the way his eyes, a shade of glacial blue, swept over the room, but never truly lingered on her. Not with the warmth she remembered from a lifetime ago, or perhaps a lifetime she had merely imagined. He spoke of our journey, our future, yet his hand, when it briefly touched hers for the toast, was cool, his grip fleeting. Later, as the last of the guests finally trickled out, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the faint ghosts of forced laughter, the silence in the vast apartment was deafening. Arthur was already in his study, the heavy oak door decisively shut a familiar barrier. He'd be on his phone, she knew his voice, a low, confidential murmur, the same tone he used for his most critical business dealings or perhaps for other more clandestine arrangements. She'd seen it more often lately, that quick, almost secretive smile playing on his lips as he glanced at his screen, a smile never directed at her. Isabel walked through the silent rooms, her reflection, a lonely figure in the darkened windows overlooking the glittering, indifferent city. The opulence felt like a gilded cage, each exquisite object a testament to a life that was rich in everything but genuine connection. She paused by his dressing room, an unspoken impulse guiding her. The air still held the faint, sharp tang of his cologne, a scent that no longer brought comfort, only a quiet, gnawing question. His suit jacket from the previous week's unavoidable trip to Chicago lay discarded on a valet stand. He'd been particularly evasive about that one. Impulsively, her fingers trembling, slightly brushed against the breast pocket. Something stiff within. A receipt. Her heart gave a small, painful lurch. It was from a jeweler, one of the city's most exclusive, dated just last Tuesday, while he was supposedly in back-to-back meetings in the Midwest. The item described was a diamond pendant, intricately designed, a significant purchase. And beneath the description, a small, almost illegible scrawl, engraving "My dearest O." Isabel's breath caught in her throat. Oh, no endearment he'd ever used for her, no private joke, no shared initial. A cold wave washed over her, so intense it left her shivering in the warm, still air of the room. This wasn't for her. This expensive, intimate gift was for someone else. An image flashed in her mind, Arthur's secretive smiles at his phone. Which important client, a bitter, sarcastic thought pricked her mind, would require a diamond pendant engraved with an O, or perhaps O stood for Operation Deception, and he was awarding himself a bonus. The carefully constructed dam of denial she had unknowingly been building for months, piece por piece, finally crumbled. This wasn't just a feeling anymore, not just the paranoid imaginings of a lonely wife. This was tangible. This was a betrayal spelled out in cold, hard print, and the glittering promise of diamonds for another. She sank onto the plush ottoman, the receipt clutched in her hand, the paper crinkling like dry leaves, like the brittle remnants of her trust. The pain was a sharp, physical ache in her chest, an agonizing confirmation of a truth she had desperately tried to ignore. Later that night, or perhaps in the sterile light of early dawn, she'd lost track of time, Arthur emerged from his study, a slight furrow in his brow, the only indication of a long night. He found her in the living room, curled on the vast sofa, the city lights a distant, mocking backdrop. "Still up, darling?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral, as if discovering his wife in a state of quiet devastation. At 3 in the morning was perfectly normal. Isabel met his gaze. Her own eyes, she knew, must look shadowed, haunted. She held up the small, damning piece of paper. "I found this in your jacket, Arthur." Her voice was surprisingly steady, a low, calm tone that belied the tempest raging within her. "From your productive trip to Chicago, I presume." He glanced at the receipt, and for a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, annoyance. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a carefully constructed mask of weary patience. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled silvering hair. "Isabel, really, must we go through this now?" He walked towards the bar, already pouring himself a drink, his back to her. It was a corporate gift for a very important client. You know how these things are. Discretion is paramount. You really don't need to concern yourself with such trivial business matters. Trivial. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and insulting. A diamond pendant for my dearest O was trivial. Her shattered trust was trivial. Their 10 years apparently were trivial. Isabel said nothing more. She watched him, his casual dismissal, his effortless deflection. The man she had married, or the man she thought she had married, was a stranger, a master of deceit, hidden behind a facade of cool sophistication. The fight, she realized, had not even truly begun. But as the first rays of a new day crept over the city, painting streaks of grey and reluctant gold across the sky, Isabel Beaumont knew one thing with a chilling certainty: a storm was coming. And this time she would not be the one to break. The triviality of Arthur's dismissal echoed in the vast, silent apartment long after he'd retreated back into his study, the heavy door clicking shut with an air of finality that was, Isabel now understood, entirely one-sided. His casual wave of the hand, the condescending pat on her shoulder, as he'd murmured something about her being overly emotional, had not extinguished the fire his betrayal had ignited. It had instead poured fuel upon the raging inferno within her. Trivial, was it? She would show him trivial. The days that followed were a masterclass in duplicity, though this time Isabel was the one wearing the mask. Outwardly, she maintained the serene composure of Isabel Beaumont, wife of Arthur Kensington. She attended the charity luncheon, smiled vaguely at the society mavens, and even endured a stilted dinner with Arthur, where he prattled on about a new acquisition, blissfully unaware of the seismic shift that had occurred within the woman seated opposite him. But inwardly, a cold, clear purpose had taken root. The shock had given way to a steely resolve, the pain morphing into a focused, unyielding anger. Her first clandestine act was to meticulously go through Arthur's home office during one of his now frequent overnight business meetings. He was careless, arrogant in his deceit. Tucked away in a seldom-used desk drawer beneath a pile of outdated financial reports, she found a slim leather-bound journal. It wasn't a diary of his thoughts, but something far more damning, a log of expenses, separate from their joint accounts, detailing lavish dinners, hotel suites, in cities he'd never claimed to visit for work, and most tellingly, recurring payments to a Miss O. Munro. Olivia Munro. The name seared itself into Isabel's mind. Further digging through online statements for a credit card Isabel hadn't known existed painted an even clearer picture. This was not a fleeting indiscretion. This was a well-established, well-funded alternate life, and there were other transactions disguised under vague consultancy fees that hinted at something more than just an affair. They suggested a potential misuse of funds, possibly siphoned from the periphery of the Beaumont family's legacy corporation, where Arthur held a significant, though not controlling, executive position. Her hands didn't tremble this time. Each discovery was a cold stone added to the foundation of her fury. The first person she confided in was Claire. Claire, her friend since their reckless college days, now a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, listened with an unnerving stillness as Isabel laid out the sordid details over coffee in Claire's sun-drenched Soho loft. When Isabel finished, her voice hoarse with unshed tears and simmering rage, Claire let out a long, slow breath. "Well, darling," she said, her voice devoid of its usual flippancy, replaced by a steely edge. "It seems Arthur Kensington, pillar of society, is also a world-class five-star scumbag." She paused, then a wry, humorless smile touched her lips. "He deserves an Oscar for that performance of bewildered innocence you described. But don't you worry, every good play has a finale. And believe me, the leading lady, that's you by the way, is about to bring the house down." Claire's unwavering support was a balm, but her next words were a call to arms. "Tears are for later, Isabel. Right now we strategize. You need a shark, a real one, not one of those apathetic corporate lawyers who'll just negotiate a settlement. You need someone who will flay him alive, metaphorically speaking, of course." And that's how Isabel found herself in the elegantly minimalist office of Ethan Cole. He was younger than she'd expected, with a keen, intelligent gaze that missed nothing. He wasn't a shark in the flamboyant sense. His power was in his quiet intensity, the precision of his questions, the almost unnerving calm with which he absorbed the details of Arthur's treachery. Isabel laid out her findings, the receipts, the journal entries, the suspicious financial statements. Ethan listened occasionally, making a concise note. When she mentioned the diamond pendant engraved with "Oh, whoa," a ghost of a smile so faint she almost missed it touched his lips. "Ah, Mr. Kensington's taste in corporate gifts is certainly specific and rather expensive, Mrs. Beaumont. We'll need a detailed inventory of these emotional investments, as it were. His dry wit, delivered with utter professionalism, was a small, unexpected moment of relief in the oppressive weight of her situation. He was, Isabel realized, exactly what she needed. Not just a lawyer, but a strategist. Your husband, Ethan, stated calmly, after reviewing the preliminary evidence, has been extraordinarily reckless. This isn't just infidelity. There are strong indicators of financial impropriety that could have serious ramifications for him, both personally and professionally. Our first step is to secure your position, particularly concerning your family's company. Armed with Ethan's initial counsel, Isabel felt a surge of control she hadn't experienced in years. That evening, she decided a more direct, albeit still private, confrontation with Arthur was necessary. She needed to gauge his reaction to see how far he would go to maintain his lies when faced with more than just a single receipt. She found him in their library, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, admiring a newly acquired painting, another symbol of their hollow affluence. Arthur, she began, her voice calm, measured a stark contrast to the turmoil inside. We need to talk about Olivia Munro. The name, dropped so casually into the quiet opulence of the room, made him flinch. Just a fraction, a tightening around his jaw, but she saw it. He turned slowly, his expression carefully schooling itself into one of mild confusion. Olivia, I'm not sure I follow. Is she a new acquaintance of yours, darling? Isabel's smile was cold. Don't insult my intelligence, Arthur. I know about the trips, the gifts, Oh, pendant. She held his gaze, refusing to look away. This time the mask of urbane charm cracked visibly. A flush crept up his neck. Now, Isabel, you're letting your imagination run wild. You've always been a bit prone to dramatics. He attempted a dismissive laugh, but it sounded strained, hollow. You're clearly overwrought. Perhaps you should see Dr. Albright again. The mention of her former therapist, a subtle insinuation that she was unstable, was a low blow designed to undermine her. But Isabel stood firm. My imagination isn't the issue here, Arthur. Your actions are, and your rather creative accounting. His eyes narrowed. The feigned concern vanished, replaced by a flash of anger, then a chilling condescension. You're treading in matters you don't understand, Isabel. These are complex business dealings. You're making wild accusations based on what a few misplaced receipts. You're being hysterical. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, almost threatening tone. I suggest you stop this foolishness before you embarrass yourself and me. But Isabel didn't flinch. His threats, his attempts at gaslighting, only solidified her resolve. She saw him then, not as the powerful, sophisticated man she had once admired, but as a cornered animal, all bluster and desperate defense. The only embarrassment, Arthur, she replied, her voice, like ice, will be yours when everyone knows the truth. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing amidst his precious art and his crumbling lies. The game had changed. She was no longer just discovering his secrets. She was actively hunting, and with Ethan Cole by her side, she knew exactly where to aim. The first part of their plan was already in motion, to untangle Arthur's financial ties to Beaumont Corp, and to begin the meticulous process of reclaiming what was rightfully hers. The war had begun. The transformation of Isabel Beaumont was nothing short of breathtaking. It began the moment she stepped back into the formidable, if somewhat staid, corporate headquarters of Beaumont Corp, the construction and real estate empire her grandfather had built from grit and vision. Walter, the company's long-time loyal manager, a man who had known Isabel since she was a girl in pigtails attending ribbon-cutting ceremonies, greeted her with a mixture of surprise and ill-concealed apprehension. He, like many, had largely seen her as Mrs. Arthur Kensington, an elegant appendage to her husband's ambition, her own considerable intellect, and Beaumont bloodline overshadowed. He was in for a shock. Walter Isabel had said her voice calm, but infused with an authority that brooked no argument as she took her seat at the head of the vast mahogany boardroom table, her grandfather's seat, then her father's. I'll need a full review of all current projects' financials for the past 5 years, and a detailed breakdown of Mr. Kensington's discretionary accounts and executive privileges within this company, effective immediately. Walter, a portly man whose usual demeanour was one of avuncular unflappability, blinked. Mrs. Beaumont, Isabel, are you quite sure Arthur has always handled those aspects with efficiency? Isabel's smile was polite but cool. I have no doubt of his past efficiency, Walter. However, Beaumont Corp is entering a new era. My era. And I intend to understand every facet of its operation. Later, Walter was overheard muttering to his trusted and equally stunned senior assistant, "Good heavens, Agnes! I always thought the boss's daughter, well, Mrs. Kensington, only knew about flower arrangements and her charity galas. Who knew her? Her internal fortitude was so profound, she's got more steel in her than her father ever did, and he was tough as nails. Isabel didn't just review, she dissected, she questioned, she challenged. She unearthed projects greenlit by Arthur that seemed to benefit his personal associates more than Beaumont Corp. She found expense reports that were creatively ambiguous. With Ethan Cole's discreet guidance, she began to assert her majority shareholder rights, tightening controls, demanding transparency. In meetings where grizzled executives, old friends of her father or associates of Arthur, initially tried to patronize her, to pat her on the head with condescending explanations, she met them with razor-sharp questions and an unshakable command of the facts. During one particularly tense negotiation with a developer, a Mr. Henderson, who clearly thought he could steamroll the new woman in charge, he'd remarked, with a dismissive wave of his hand, "Now, little lady, perhaps the men should handle these complex figures." Isabel had let a small, dangerous smile play on her lips. Henderson, she'd replied, her voice soft, but carrying the icy weight of authority. "The only little thing I see in this room is your understanding of Beaumont Corp's bottom line, if you continue with that outdated assumption. Shall we return to the figures, or would you prefer I itemize the complexities of your company's rather precarious debt-to-equity ratio for you?" Henderson had sputtered his face, turning a fascinating shade of puce, and had, for the remainder of the meeting, addressed her as Miss Beaumont, with newfound, if grudging, respect. Her public image, too, underwent a metamorphosis. Gone were the muted, albeit elegant, gowns of Mrs. Arthur Kensington. In their place were sharp, impeccably tailored suits, bold colors that spoke of confidence, a new striking hairstyle that framed a face now alive with purpose and determination. She attended key industry events, not as a socialite, but as a formidable CEO, her insights and articulate vision captivating attention. The business columns, once focused on Arthur's latest ventures, began to feature Isabel Beaumont, the rising power, the intelligent woman reclaiming her legacy. While Isabel was ascending, Arthur Kensington was beginning a slow, agonizing descent into a quagmire of his own making. The initial pressure came from Olivia Munro. "Arthur, darling." Olivia purred one evening in the lavishly appointed love nest he maintained for her, its existence a blatant drain on funds he was increasingly struggling to disguise. She was admiring a new diamond bracelet, a recent acquisition he'd made in a desperate attempt to keep her placated. "This is lovely, truly. But don't you think it's time we were a little more Public? I get so tired of sneaking around, and all my friends are summering in the Hamptons. Our little city getaways are becoming a tad predictable. Her pout was practiced. Her eyes, however, held a glint of steely demand. Besides, she added, running a perfectly manicured finger down his lapel, my handbag collection is tragically missing several of the new season's colors. A woman of our stature needs to keep up appearances, wouldn't you agree? Arthur, already on edge from Isabel's unnerving transformation at Beaumont Corp, and the disquieting questions Ethan Cole's office had begun to formally pose regarding certain expenditures, found Olivia's demands increasingly grating. Olivia, we've discussed this. He snapped more harshly than he intended. My situation is delicate at the moment. Isabel is being difficult. Difficult. Olivia raised a sculpted eyebrow. Or has she simply grown tired of being your doormat, Arthur? Perhaps if you'd paid more attention to your actual wife, you wouldn't be in this delicate situation. The barb coming from his mistress was particularly galling. The external pressures mounted. Ethan Cole, with surgical precision, initiated a series of legal inquiries that began to restrict Arthur's unilateral control over certain company assets. Whispers carefully planted by sources Ethan cultivated began to circulate in the tight-knit financial district. Vague allusions to managerial irregularities at Beaumont Corp under Arthur's influence, quiet questions about his increasingly erratic decision-making. An influential financial blogger, known for his incisive and often damaging exposés, published a thinly veiled piece about a certain New York power couple where the husband's extracurricular activities and cavalier attitude towards corporate governance were causing concern. No names were mentioned, but everyone in their circle knew. Arthur felt the walls closing in. Lifelong business associates suddenly became unavailable for lunch. His calls to old allies like Mark Donovan were met with polite but cool evasiveness. He became a creature of suspicion and frayed nerves, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. The once smooth facade was cracking, revealing the insecure, desperate man beneath. His arguments with Olivia became more frequent, more bitter. You and your incessant spending, he'd raged during one particularly ugly spat. Do you have any idea the kind of scrutiny I'm under? And whose fault is that, Arthur? Olivia had retorted, her voice dripping with contempt. Perhaps if you hadn't been so sloppy, so arrogant, you wouldn't be whining to me now. I didn't sign up to be the mistress of a sinking ship. Isabel, observing from a strategic distance, felt no triumph, only a grim satisfaction that the wheels of consequence were finally irrevocably turning. Her focus was singular: to protect her family's legacy, to secure her own future, and to ensure that Arthur Kensington would be held accountable for every last one of his deceptions. The board meeting where she would formally challenge his remaining authority was fast approaching. She was ready. The final explosive argument between Arthur Kensington and Olivia Munro had been inevitable, a cataclysm brewed from his mounting desperation and her simmering resentment. It happened in the very love nest he'd furnished with such illicit extravagance. Arthur, his face a mask of strained fury, had finally snapped under the combined weight of Isabel's relentless corporate maneuvers and Olivia's increasingly shrill demands for reassurance and more material proof of his affection. Do you think money grows on trees? Olivia, he'd roared, a far cry from the suave millionaire who had once charmed her. The tap is running dry, thanks to my understanding wife and her bloodhound lawyer. I'm fighting for my corporate life here, and all you can think about is your next shopping spree. Olivia, far from being cowed, had turned on him with the fury of a woman scorned, and more importantly, a woman terrified of losing her gilded lifestyle. My shopping sprees. You're the one who promised me the world, Arthur. You're the one who said Isabel was a passionless antique you were merely tolerating. And now you expect me to what? Live on a budget. Perhaps you've been trimming expenses on me, too. That little trinket you gave me last month barely sparkled. She'd then delivered her own devastating blow, revealing she was aware of another, newer acquaintance Arthur had been cultivating, a model even younger, even more demanding. His betrayal, it seemed, knew no bounds, not even within his own infidelities. That was the tipping point. Olivia Munro, realizing Arthur was not just a sinking ship, but also a faithless captain, decided her only loyalty was to herself. If Arthur was going down, he wasn't dragging her with him without a fight, or better yet, a deal. A few days later, a meticulously dressed Olivia Munro, radiating an almost theatrical air of wronged virtue, presented herself at the imposing offices of Ethan Cole. Mr. Cole, she began her voice, a carefully modulated blend of vulnerability and resolve after being ushered into his private meeting room. I believe I have information that could be mutually beneficial regarding Arthur Kensington. Ethan, ever the consummate professional, listened impassively, though a keen observer might have noticed the slightest lift of an eyebrow as Olivia dramatically detailed Arthur's deceptions, not just against Isabel, but as she framed it against her as well. She painted herself as a woman, misled a heart exploited. Then came the real offering. Arthur, she said, leaning forward conspiratorially, is not just a cheat in marriage, Mr. Cole. He's a cheat in business, a very big one. There are offshore accounts, creative invoices, certain project developments that exist only on paper but have consumed millions. She paused, then played her card. I have details, names, account numbers, enough to ensure Arthur Kensington spends his twilight years in a much less opulent setting. Her price immunity if possible, or at the very least, a significant reduction in any potential culpability on her part. And with a breathtaking audacity that almost made Ethan smile, she'd added, and perhaps, Mr. Cole, considering my cooperation some small consideration for the emotional distress and financial insecurity I now face, that little Miami penthouse Arthur promised me. It would be a start. Ethan, maintaining his professional poker face, simply made a note. After she'd presented a tantalizing sample of her evidence and departed, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and calculated desperation, he called Isabel. Miss Munro, he said, a dry, almost imperceptible note of amusement in his voice, is quite a treasure trove of information, Isabel. And an equally large trove of complications. We'll certainly need more than a few strong coffees for this one. But her information, if verifiable, is dynamite. Isabel, though repulsed by the idea of any association with Olivia, recognized the strategic advantage. This wasn't about trust, it was about leverage. Olivia's betrayal of Arthur, born of self-preservation and spite, could be the final nail in his coffin. Under Ethan's careful guidance, a discreet arm's-length agreement was reached. Olivia, in exchange for a carefully worded affidavit and the promise that her cooperation would be duly noted by relevant authorities, a promise Ethan made with all the appropriate legal caveats, began to sing like a canary. She provided access codes, names of shell corporations, dates of illicit transfers, a roadmap of Arthur's financial treachery that was far more extensive and damning than Isabel or Ethan had initially suspected. It painted a picture of a man systematically defrauding not only his wife and her family's company, but also potentially the government. With this new arsenal, Isabel and Ethan finalized their plans for the upcoming Beaumont Foundation Charity Gala. It was Isabel's signature event, one Arthur had always used as a platform for his own self-aggrandizement. This year it would serve a very different purpose. Invitations went out to the city's elite key figures in finance, influential members of the press, and through discreet back channels, a few interested observers from regulatory bodies. The stage was being meticulously set. Arthur, meanwhile, was unraveling. The whispers about him had grown louder, more specific. He saw Isabel's hand in everything, her serene confidence at recent public appearances, the sudden inexplicable roadblocks he was encountering in his own business dealings. He called Mark Donovan, his old associate, his voice a tight wire of anxiety. "Mark, I need your help. Things are difficult. There are rumors, damaging ones." "Isabel." Donovan's reply was chillingly polite. "Arthur, I'm afraid I'm overextended at the moment, and frankly, the kind of difficulties you seem to be encountering are a bit beyond my appetite for risk these days. Perhaps you should speak to your lawyers." Click. The isolation was a palpable thing, a suffocating blanket. He became a ghost in his own opulent penthouse, pacing jumpy at every unexpected sound his phone clutched in a sweaty palm. He'd sometimes catch himself muttering aloud, rehearsing defenses to accusations no one had yet formally made. He knew Isabel was planning something for the gala. Her name was too prominent, her control too absolute for it to be otherwise. He just didn't know what the precise nature of the trap was. He swung between a desperate hope that he could still somehow outmaneuver her, and a gnawing certainty that his world was about to implode. The not knowing was perhaps the worst part of the torment. He was a fly buzzing erratically aware of the tightening strands of an invisible, perfectly spun web. The Beaumont Foundation Charity Gala was the glittering apex of the New York social calendar, and tonight it was Isabel Beaumont's stage. The grand ballroom of the Astoria shimmered a symphony of crystal silver and cascading orchids. Soft music, a live orchestra this time, drifted through the air, weaving through the conversations of the city's most influential figures, titans of industry, philanthropists, artists, and the ever-present, keenly observant press. Isabel, in a gown the color of molten gold that seemed to radiate an inner light, moved among them, with a new-found regality, a serene commander in her element. She was no longer just Arthur Kensington's wife. She was Isabel Beaumont, the formidable head of Beaumont Corp, a woman reborn. When the time came, she ascended the dais, the murmur of the crowd hushing expectantly. The spotlight found her, and for a moment she simply stood there, a portrait of grace and quiet power. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice, amplified slightly, resonated with a warmth and clarity that captivated every listener. "Thank you for joining us tonight, not only to support the vital work of the Beaumont Foundation, but to celebrate something profoundly important. Something I've come to understand deeply in recent times." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. Resilience, the courage to face adversity, to unearth difficult truths, and from the wreckage of what was to build something stronger, something truer. She spoke of second chances, of the importance of integrity, not just in business, but in life. Her words were not a direct accusation, not yet, but an undercurrent of profound personal conviction flowed beneath them, and many in the room who knew the whispers, the rumors, felt a frisson of anticipation. For too long she continued her voice, gaining strength. Shadows can be allowed to lengthen, to obscure what is real. But tonight is about bringing light. It's about the enduring power of truth. It was at that precise, pregnant moment that the grand double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open with a dramatic, unscripted flourish. Arthur Kensington strode in. Heads turned. A collective gasp, quickly suppressed, rippled through the room. He was not on the guest list. His presence was an intrusion, an open act of defiance. He wore a tuxedo, his silver hair impeccably coiffed, but there was a wildness in his eyes, a desperate, hunted look beneath the forced smile he plastered on his face as he made his way towards the stage. A few of the more seasoned society columnists subtly signaled their photographers. One or two whispered into their recorders, "This is it." Better than a Broadway premiere, Isabel watched his approach, her expression unreadable, her composure absolute. She did not falter. "Arthur," she said, her voice still amplified, carrying a note of cool surprise that cut through the sudden tension. What an unexpected addition to our evening. He reached the foot of the dais, looking up at her, his smile strained. "Isabel, my dear, a magnificent speech. Truly inspiring. I simply had to be here to support you, as always." He attempted a charming chuckle, but it died in his throat. "Support Arthur." Isabel's voice dropped slightly, drawing the audience in. That's a fascinating choice of words, especially coming from a man who has so expertly supported a double life funded by deceit and built upon the foundations of betrayal. The room erupted in a cacophony of shocked murmurs and camera flashes. Arthur's face went ashen. "Isabel, this is hardly the time or place." He began, his voice hoarse. "Oh, I think it's the perfect time and place." Isabel countered, her gaze unwavering. She gestured towards the side of the stage, and Ethan Cole stepped forward, holding a sleek digital tablet. For years, Arthur Kensington has presented himself as a paragon of business acumen and marital devotion. Her voice, though calm, was laced with steel. "Tonight you will all see the reality." What followed was a systematic, irrefutable demolition of Arthur Kensington's carefully constructed world. Ethan Cole, with calm legal precision, presented the evidence on large screens that descended silently from the ceiling. Forged signatures on Beaumont Corp documents, authorizing exorbitant consulting fees that flowed directly into offshore accounts. Credit card statements detailing lavish expenditures for Olivia Munro, 5-star hotels, designer boutiques, private jet charters, all itemized, all undeniable. Surveillance photos discreetly obtained of Arthur and Olivia in intimate settings, their laughter a silent mockery. Audio snippets recovered from a discarded device of Arthur's, where he callously discussed how to further exploit Isabel's trust and the Beaumont assets. Arthur stood frozen, his face contorting through a grotesque ballet of disbelief, rage, and dawning terror. He stammered, This is outrageous. Fabricated a smear campaign by a vindictive..." His words were cut short by another even more dramatic entrance. Olivia Munro, a vision in a crimson dress that seemed to scream defiance, swept into the ballroom, a look of cold fury on her face. She was not on any guest list, not part of Isabel's meticulously orchestrated plan in this specific manner. She carried a small encrypted flash drive in her hand. Vindictive Arthur Olivia's voice, sharp and clear, sliced through the stunned silence. "You want to talk about vindictive? Or perhaps we should talk about your very creative international accounting practices. Your charming little shell corporations in the Caymans, the ones you assured me were perfectly legal, just smart business." She strode towards the stunned technicians by the AV podium. "Perhaps these might be of interest," she said, holding up the drive. "A little something extra I kept for a rainy day. It seems that day has arrived." Arthur looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "Olivia, no. You don't know what you're doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing." "Arthur." She spat back, her beautiful face a mask of contempt. "I'm ensuring that if I'm going down for being your fool, you're coming with me right to the bottom." The contents of Olivia's drive, when displayed, were even more damning than Isabel or Ethan had initially anticipated from her affidavit. It was a meticulously kept record of wire transfers, coded ledgers, and even a few short video clips of Arthur boasting to Olivia about his cleverness in evading taxes and moving assets, implicating himself beyond any shadow of a doubt in serious financial crimes, including money laundering on an international scale. It also inadvertently, yet undeniably, exposed Olivia's own awareness, and in some instances her willing participation in receiving the proceeds of these crimes. The denouement was swift, as Olivia's final damning piece of evidence played out several unobtrusive figures who had been mingling amongst the guests, representatives from the district attorney's office and the IRS tipped off by Ethan Cole about potential financial crimes, moved quietly but decisively towards Arthur. He didn't resist. The fight had gone out of him. He looked like a broken mannequin, his bravado shattered, his carefully crafted world turned to dust before his very eyes. As they escorted him out, the flashes of the cameras were blinding, a merciless barrage. Then two other plainclothes officers approached a now visibly trembling Olivia Monroe. Ms. Monroe, one said, his voice polite but firm. "We have some questions for you regarding your involvement in Mr. Kensington's financial affairs. Perhaps you'd be kind enough to accompany us." Her face, moments before alight with vengeful triumph, crumpled. The crimson dress suddenly looked garish, her bravado a pathetic sham. She too was led away, the whispers and horrified stares of the assembled elite following her every step. Isabel Beaumont stood on the dais, composed, watching the wreckage of two deceitful lives being cleared from her stage. A profound silence fell over the ballroom, broken only by the distant wail of a siren. Then someone began to clap. It started slowly, hesitantly, then swelled into a thunderous, sustained standing ovation. It wasn't just for the drama or the downfall of a powerful man. It was for her, for Isabel, for her courage, her strength, her unyielding pursuit of truth and justice. The night of destiny had delivered its verdict. 1 year later, the name Isabel Beaumont was synonymous not just with corporate acumen, but with an almost mythic resilience. Beaumont Corp, under her stewardship, had not only been cleansed of Arthur Kensington's parasitic influence, but had soared to new heights of success, its foundations rebuilt on unwavering integrity and innovative vision. Isabel moved through the business world with a quiet authority that commanded respect, her past adversities having forged an unshakable core of strength. She was no longer a woman defined by her husband's betrayal, but a leader defined by her own triumphs. But her true legacy, she felt, was taking shape beyond the gleaming towers of finance. With a significant portion of her reclaimed fortune, Isabel established the Phoenix Initiative, a foundation dedicated to empowering women who had survived deceit abuse or profound hardship, helping them rebuild their lives and rediscover their own strength. It was here, in the hushed, hopeful atmosphere of the initiative's headquarters, that she met Sophie, a young architect whose spirit had been nearly broken by a manipulative partner who had stolen her designs and her confidence. "He told me I was nothing without him," Sophie had whispered during their first meeting, her eyes still shadowed. Isabel had taken her hand, and now she'd said, her voice gentle but firm, "You will show him, and more importantly yourself, that you are everything." Seeing the spark of hope rekindle in Sophie's eyes, watching her slowly reclaim her talent and her future, brought Isabel a profound satisfaction that no corporate victory ever could. News of Arthur Kensington occasionally filtered through the financial pages, or a hushed mention from Ethan Cole. He was serving a lengthy sentence in a federal penitentiary, the once mighty millionaire, reduced to a number in a drab uniform. One crisp autumn afternoon, a letter arrived at Isabel's private office, bearing a prison postmark. It was from Arthur. His handwriting was hesitant, a stark contrast to the bold, decisive strokes he'd once used. The letter was not a plea for forgiveness. Even he, it seemed, understood the chasm he had created was too vast to bridge. Instead, it was a rambling, raw confession of his arrogance, his folly, his devastating underestimation of the woman he had so carelessly betrayed. He wrote of long, empty nights, filled with a regret so profound it was a physical ache. He acknowledged her strength, her brilliance, a brilliance he had been too blind, too self-absorbed to see. Isabel read it, a fleeting shadow of old sorrow passing over her face, quickly replaced by a serene composure. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a locked drawer, not as a memento of pain, but as a final closing of a painful chapter. He would remain a part of her past, a catalyst for her transformation, but he held no place in her meticulously reconstructed present, nor in her bright, expansive future. Olivia Munro, too, was paying her dues. Her cooperation had earned her a slightly reduced sentence compared to Arthur's, but her once glamorous life was now confined to the four walls of a women's correctional facility. Her assets had been seized, her name a byword for avarice and foolish ambition. The tabloids, once fascinated by her illicit affair, now only mentioned her as a cautionary tale. There was no glamour in her downfall, only the stark reality of choices made and prices paid. Isabel's own life had found a new, more authentic rhythm. Her friendship with Claire remained a vital anchor filled with laughter and unwavering support. During one of their regular Sunday brunches, Claire, observing Isabel's radiant calm, raised her mimosa. "Well, darling," she'd said, her eyes twinkling, "I always told you, diamonds shine anywhere they're placed. It's only the lumps of coal that need endless, futile polishing and still end up looking, well, like lumps of coal." They'd both laughed, a genuine, carefree sound that spoke volumes of Isabel's healing. Ethan Cole had become a steadfast presence, a trusted advisor, and gradually a cherished friend. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, intellectual sparring, and a quiet understanding that needed few words. There was an easy warmth between them, a potential for something more, perhaps. But Isabel was in no rush. Her happiness was no longer contingent on a romantic partner. It was self-generated, rooted in her purpose and her peace. One evening, as they reviewed plans for a new Phoenix Initiative Center, Ethan had looked at her, a rare, open admiration in his eyes. "You've built something incredible, Isabel. Not just with Beaumont Corp, but this. You've turned so much darkness into light." Isabel had smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. Thinking back, she mused, a touch of gentle self-deprecation in her tone. "I suppose I should almost thank Arthur. Without that rather dramatic push, I might still be fussing over the correct shade of damask for the guest wing curtains and calling it a life." Ethan chuckled. "Somehow I doubt you were ever truly just fussing about curtains, Isabel." And he was right. The strength, the intellect, the compassion. It had always been there, dormant perhaps, but waiting. The betrayal had been the violent catalyst, the fire that had burned away the dross, leaving only the pure, resilient core of the woman she was always meant to be. Standing on the balcony of her new apartment, a place filled with light art she truly loved, and the quiet hum of a life lived on her own terms, Isabel Beaumont looked out at the sprawling cityscape. It was no longer a cold, indifferent witness to her loneliness, but a panorama of endless possibility. She had faced the storm, navigated the wreckage, and emerged not just intact, but transformed, The scars were their faint reminders of battles fought and won, but they no longer ached. They were a testament to her journey to the priceless lessons learned. A new dawn had broken bright and full of promise, and Isabel Beaumont was ready to meet it, her spirit free, her heart finally at peace. And so Isabel Beaumont's tumultuous journey has reached its conclusion, closing a dark chapter of her life to open a new, more radiant dawn. From the ashes of betrayal and heartbreak, she not only rose, but rebuilt a meaningful life, a testament to the extraordinary power of resilience and self-respect. Could it be that in our most painful losses, we truly discover the strongest version of ourselves, a version we perhaps never knew existed? The complex emotions, the difficult choices Isabel faced, who knows, they might also be quietly present in the lives of those around us, or even within our own experiences. Isabel Beaumont's story has surely left unique echoes and reflections in each of our hearts. We believe every story is an opportunity to connect and share. In your opinion, which moment in Isabel's journey truly touched your heart the most? And what lesson do you feel was most significant for you personally? And if you have any thoughts about the story you just heard, from the plot points, the characters' psychological development, or even a different ending you envisioned, please don't hesitate to share them with us in the comments below. We deeply value all contributions, as they are a precious source of motivation for us to make future stories touch our listeners' hearts even more profoundly. If Isabel's emotional journey also resonated with you, please support us with a like. And if you feel this story could bring empathy or a meaningful message to others, please share it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so we can continue to journey together through many more profound and inspiring stories in the future. Thank you for taking the time to listen. We wish you a day filled with much joy and peace in your soul.